Quiet drama. My aunt moved into Grandma's house the day she passed, so I changed every lock before she could unpack. I want to tell you about the moment I stood on my grandmother's porch at 11 o'clock at night with a locksmith I had called 40 minutes earlier, while my aunt's car was still parked in the driveway, and I watched him change every lock on that house. She was inside when he started. She didn't know I was outside, and by the time she figured out what was happening, it was already done. My name is Delaney Voss. I'm a social worker. I have spent 11 years helping families navigate the worst moments of their lives: custody hearings, emergency removals, end-of-life planning, the kind of paperwork that nobody wants to fill out but everybody eventually has to. I know what grief looks like from every angle. I know what people do to each other when someone dies and the house is still warm and the will hasn't been read yet. I should have seen it coming. I didn't. Because she was family. And family, I kept telling myself, is different. It isn't. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the end only makes sense if you understand how long this had been building. My grandmother's name was Cecilia Voss. She was 79 years old, and she had lived in the same white clapboard house on Roanoke Mill Road in Harwick, a small town in central Virginia, for 51 years. She had raised 3 children in that house. She had buried a husband in the church 2 miles down the road. She had kept a garden in the back that produced more tomatoes than one person could ever eat, and she gave them away to neighbors until the neighbors started leaving containers on the porch so they could return them. She was the kind of woman who made a place feel held together. Not loudly, not with drama, just by being there, consistent and warm and entirely herself. She was also, in the last 2 years of her life, increasingly unwell. She had a degenerative condition that affected her mobility and gradually her memory. She needed help with meals. She needed help with medications. She needed someone to drive her to appointments and make sure she took the right pills in the right order and didn't leave the stove on. I was the one who did that. I want to be clear about this, not because I want credit, but because it matters to what comes later. I drove 40 minutes each way, 3 times a week for 2 years. I managed her medications. I attended every doctor's appointment. I set up her home care schedule, coordinated with her physician, handled her insurance paperwork. I did this while working full-time and while my aunt, my grandmother's daughter, who lived 25 minutes away, sent flowers on birthdays and called on Sundays when she remembered. Her name is Rennie Voss Hartwell. She is my father's sister. She is 61 years old and she has always believed that things should come to her by right of wanting them badly enough. She wanted that house. She had wanted it for years. I knew this. My grandmother knew this. It came up at Thanksgiving once when my grandmother was still sharp enough to shut it down with a look. Rennie had said something about how the house was too much for one person, and my grandmother had said very quietly, "It is exactly enough for me," and that had been the end of it. That year, my grandmother passed on a Tuesday in October. She went in her sleep in her own bed, in the house on Roanoke Mill Road. I had been there the day before. I had made sure her medications were set, that the home aide knew the schedule for the week, that the heating was working because the nights had turned cold. I had sat with her for an hour before I left, and she had held my hand and told me I was a good girl and I had driven home and I had not known it was the last time. I got the call at 6:47 in the morning. By 9 a.m., Rennie's car was in the driveway. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My grandmother had been gone for less than 3 hours. The home aide had called me, then called the funeral home, then called Rennie because Rennie was listed as secondary contact. And Rennie had driven 25 minutes and been there before the body had even been removed. I arrived 40 minutes after Rennie called me. She had not called me first. When I walked in, she was in my grandmother's bedroom. She was going through the closet. I stood in the doorway. I was still in the clothes I had grabbed off the chair. I hadn't even changed properly. I looked at my grandmother's bed, which was stripped, the sheets already folded into a pile in the corner, and I looked at Rennie, who had her back to me and was pulling boxes off the upper shelf. I said, "What are you doing?" She turned around. She had the expression of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to go. She said, "There's a lot to sort through. I'm getting a head start." I said, "Grandma has been gone for 2 hours." She said, "I know that, Delaney. I was here before you were." That sentence. I have thought about it many times since. The particular satisfaction in it, the way she said it like arriving first meant something, like proximity to death was a competition she had won. I said, "This isn't your house, Rennie," she said. "Not yet, but we both know it will be." I said, "Do we?" She set the box down. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as practiced patience, the look of someone who has already decided that the other person is being difficult and irrational and will eventually come around. She said, "Your father and I are the heirs. There are 2 children. The house will be divided equally. And since your father lives in Phoenix and has no interest in coming back to Harwick, it makes sense that I handle the estate, including the house." I said. "Has the will been read?" She said. "I know what's in the will." I said, "That's not what I asked." She picked the box back up and turned to the closet. "Here is what I knew that Rennie did not know I knew. 6 months earlier, my grandmother had asked me to drive her to see an attorney in Charlottesville. She had not told me why exactly. She had said she wanted to update some paperwork and she didn't want to make a fuss about it. I drove her. I waited in the lobby while she was inside for an hour and 15 minutes. She came out with a manila folder and she held it in her lap the whole drive home, and when I asked if everything was okay, she said, "Everything is exactly right now." She never told me the details. I didn't ask. It was her paperwork and her life and her house. But I remembered that drive. I remembered the folder. And I remembered that she had specifically said she wanted to update things, which meant something had been different before. I called the attorney's office that afternoon, while Rennie was still moving through rooms with the quiet efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. I identified myself. I explained the situation. The attorney's assistant said she couldn't share details, but confirmed that my grandmother had indeed executed updated documents in April, and that the estate would be handled through the office. That was enough. That night, while Rennie went home to get clothes, she had announced, over a dinner she made in my grandmother's kitchen from my grandmother's food, that she would be staying at the house until things were settled, as if this were obvious, as if nobody would think to question it. I sat in my car in the driveway and I called a locksmith. I want to be honest about what I was thinking. I was not thinking clearly in the way that I usually think. I was tired and grieving, and I had watched my aunt strip my grandmother's bed 3 hours after she died. But I was also, underneath the grief, operating on something that my years of social work had built in me, the ability to act before the window closes. And I knew, the way I know things in my work when a situation is about to go wrong, that if I let Rennie stay in that house, getting her out later would be a legal process that could take months. I knew that possession, even informal possession, creates complications. I knew that the cleanest thing I could do was make sure that the house was secured before anything became entrenched. The locksmith arrived at 11:15. Rennie was inside. Her car was in the driveway. Her overnight bag was in the guest room. He changed the front door lock, the back door lock, the garage side entry. He was done in 40 minutes. I rang the doorbell. A look on her face when she opened the door, and I held up the new key as something I will carry with me for a long time. Not with satisfaction, I want to be clear about that. With a kind of sorrow, actually, that it had come to this. That the day my grandmother died had also had to be this. She said, "What did you do?" I said, "I secured the house." She said, "This is not your house." I said, "It's not yours either, not until the will is read. And until then, nobody should be treating it like it is." She said, "I am family. I have every right." I said, "You stripped her bed, Rennie. She had been gone for 2 hours." Silence, I said, "I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm not claiming anything that isn't mine. I'm making sure that nothing gets removed or changed or damaged before the estate is properly handled. That's all." She said, "You'll regret this." I said, "I hope not." She took her overnight bag from the guest room and she left. The will reading was 9 days later. I will tell you what was in it, because it matters. My grandmother had left the house on Roanoke Mill Road to me, not to her 2 children equally divided, not to the family as a shared asset. To me, specifically, by name, with a notation from the attorney that read, and I am paraphrasing, because I don't have it in front of me, but I remember every word, that my grandmother had made this decision based on my consistent presence, care, and dedication over the preceding 2 years, and that it was her explicit wish that the house remain in the hands of someone who would love it the way she had. She had left Rennie and my father each a sum of money from her savings. It was not a small amount. It was, the attorney said, what she had felt was fair given the circumstances. Rennie stood up from her chair when the attorney finished reading. She said, "This is wrong. This is manipulation. Delaney manipulated a sick old woman." Attorney said very calmly, "Your mother was assessed as fully competent at the time of signing. This document is valid." Rennie said, "I'll contest it." Attorney said, "That is your right." She looked at me. I want to tell you I had something to say, something precise and final that closed the door on it. I didn't. I just looked back at her. She left without speaking to me. She did contest it. Her attorney sent a letter 4 weeks later alleging undue influence. My attorney responded with documentation, the care logs I had kept, the medical records, the pharmacy receipts, the calendar of appointments. 2 years of showing up, organized into evidence. The contest was dropped 8 weeks after that. I am sitting in the house on Roanoke Mill Road as I tell you this. The tomato garden is overgrown. I haven't had time to tend it properly yet. The kitchen tiles are the same ones my grandmother chose in 1987. The heating still makes a sound in the walls when it first comes on, like the house is clearing its throat. I still drive 40 minutes to work. I still come home to a place that smells faintly of the lavender she kept in a drawer in the hallway. I didn't take it from anyone. It was given to me by the person who had the right to give it. And on the night I stood on that porch with a locksmith and a new key, I wasn't being greedy or vindictive or strategic. I was just making sure that the house my grandmother loved was still standing when the truth came out. It was. The quiet drama. The quiet ones always have the loudest stories.